Does Brad Tree Living do the unthinkable and consider trading potentially their best player this year in William Nylander to help out the back end and potentially also the bottom six?
I don't know if he'll do it or if he is considering it, but he absolutely should consider it. And the reason I thought about this is I watched the game with a bunch of Leafs fans this past weekend, and they all brought it up. They're like, it's a contract year. Maybe this is the best time to trade Nylander. And I never really thought about it because I'm like, oh, they're probably going to lock him up. But with the way the team is built at the moment and what we've seen in the past, they need to consider it. And if there's a guy that's willing to make a huge trade like this and trade a franchise piece, it's Brad Tree Living, because he's done it. Most recently trading Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau. I mean, it didn't work out and hasn't worked out for Calgary, worked out well for Florida, but he's willing to make that move. And the reason I say Nylander as well is because I think he's the only one out of that core four you can realistically trade. One guy is untradeable, and John Tavares. He's not going to waive his no trade. Yeah. Matthews is locked in for the future. And Marner, I think, is too valuable. Plus, he's going to end up being overpaid as well. So I think it has to be Nylander, a guy who wants $10 million and I think deserves $10 million. He's going to be another probably 40-goal scorer. He's an 80-plus point guy, if not more. He's on a 15-game point streak at the moment. So I think if you're looking for value in return, you can get it with Willie Nylander. And he doesn't have a full no move. He has a 10-team no trade. So it depends on who's on that no trade list when you're looking for teams to deal with. But you should definitely consider it, because what are the Leafs' goals this season and for the foreseeable future? It's one thing. It's to win the Stanley Cup. Can they win the cup with this team right now? No. Can they win the cup with 4 forwards making $40+ million of their salary cap, which is almost 50% of the cap? No. Do they have the defense to contend right now? No. Do they have the goaltending to make up for a bad blue line? No. One guy you took to arbitration and you told him how bad he was, so you didn't have to pay him that much. The other guy is a rookie with just 20 games under his belt. Granted, he looks good, but do you trust him enough to win you games when your defense can't perform? And they need to just invest in their defense. I mean, look at the contenders around them. Look at the Boston Bruins. They have one $10 million plus player, and that's Pastrnak, and then heavily invested into their blue line. Tampa Bay, they have Kucherov and Point, both at under $10 million, invested heavily into their defense. Vegas, one $10 million player in Jack Eichel, invested heavily into their defense. This is how you do it, and you need cap flexibility. I don't care how much the cap is going up. Having 4+ players making $10+ million is not the recipe for success. We've seen it time and time again. I don't know how many more times the Maple Leafs need to see this core fail in the playoffs, right? It's just not going to work. You have AHL defensemen playing right now. You paid John Klingberg $4+ million. He's not working out. You have a 40-year-old Mark Giordano who's still a good defenseman, but is not going to be able to play 20 minutes every single night. Morgan Riley's definitely their best defenseman. TJ Brody, I think, has taken a step back. You need to invest in secondary scoring because Matthews and Marner and Tavares and Willie can't do it by themselves. And if you're losing Willie Nylander, you're not going to win the trade. There's no way. You're not getting a like-for-like player, but that's not what the trade is about. The trade is about investing in the defense and making your team ready for a true playoff push and not relying on a couple of guys to get it done for you because they haven't gotten it done in the past.
Albert, you answered my question, or sorry, my rebuttal at the end of that. The Leafs would lose this trade regardless, right? When you look at the first question I have for you, another question I have for you, when you were discussing this idea of potentially trading William Nylander, how many adult beverages were you in that night?
Not many. I actually dismissed it when it was brought up. I was like, no, you can't do that. But then I started thinking about a contract year. He's really playing up for it. We know players in the past, and you know this too, Justin. You've been watching hockey a long time. Yeah. Comes down to a contract year. Player has their best year. They get paid, and it starts going south. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Willie because he's been good up until this point. But that's something you really have to think about. But if the Toronto Maple Leafs have had all their ducks in the row in terms of having a good defense, a legitimate goaltender, some secondary scoring, you wouldn't even have to consider this. But you have to. Like you cannot have 4 players making 10+.
It doesn't matter. But here's the thing: it doesn't matter whether that you can or can't. You have to now. You have to. If you trade William Nylander in a contract year, right? First of all, he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. So a team is not going to give up all those assets that you would want for a rental potentially. right? If you wanted to trade him, you should have traded him last summer when he had term on his deal still, and then a team had a little bit more certainty, right? For example, say a team like, I don't know, throw a team out there that's somewhat, a team like Carolina, who has a lot of defensive assets to give up and is a contender. Are they going to part ways with players of their own that are a top 4 defenseman for a forward that they're not too sure is going to re-sign? No, right? Think about this market, the Toronto market. If you trade a guy who's on pace to score 55 goals, have 120 plus points this season, you trade that for spare parts. William Nylander's $1, and you get what, three quarters, a dime, a nickel, and another dime, right? You're getting basically change on the dollar, right? You're not getting full value for it. It's not a full hockey trade, right? Plus, his cap is only $6.9 million, and the player and the caliber defenseman you need to bring back is going to cost you at least $4.55 million, and it doesn't make any sense to do that, right? This is a move, if they were ever to trade William Nylander, would be when he has term in the offseason, when you can maneuver more. This is not a deadline deal, Albert. This is a major shakeup that this will not happen. And you mentioned the Matthew Tkachuk deal, but that was a different situation. Matthew Tkachuk said, I don't want to re-sign long-term in Calgary. William Nylander has not said he does not want to sign long-term in Toronto. Apparently, from all accounts, we think he wants to stay in Toronto long-term. This is the mess from the Dubas regime that they have to live with. You signed Tavares to an $11 million deal. You have to live for that for one more year after this. You signed Morgan Rielly to a $7 million a year contract. Is he worth that? I don't know. Mitch Marner's making $10.9 million. You can bet your bottom dollar when it's time for him to get a new contract at this offseason, he's going to ask starting at least 12, right? So this is the mess that the Maple Leafs did. You are stuck with this core. You sacrificed a defense and depth in defense when you signed these forwards to big ticket contracts.
So what does that mean? You keep saying stuck with this core, but does that mean don't do anything?
What can you do? Are you going to trade William Nylander at the deadline as a rental? You're not going to get full value for that. It doesn't make sense. Nobody's going to touch the John Tavares contract. Mitch Marner, is this market going to want you to? I can see maybe a Marner trade in the offseason because he still has one more year on his deal after that. But even then, you would have to trade him to a team that he wants to go to, because I'm pretty sure he's got a full no move clause in his deal. And then that team would have to have assurances that he's going to sign a long-term deal with him. That is the only move I could see happen, because you're not going to trade Matthews. You made that very apparent when you signed him this past offseason. So Marner is the only move they can really make, because he still has his contract has not been signed yet. But then again, we talked about superstars and their preferences and catering to them. Would you imagine posing to Austin Matthews? Yeah, we're going to trade Mitch Marner in the offseason. How do you think he feels about that? How do you think he would feel about that?
I don't think it matters. He's already committed.
But here's the thing. They've proven and they've showed that they want to do what's right by Austin Matthews, right? And again, top 4 defensemen are so hard to get. They're extremely hard to get. The Canucks got Filip Hronek last year, who is now a top 4 defenseman, but they had to give a first-round pick, and he was hurt, right? He was coming off of a serious injury. Top 4 defensemen, when they're there, teams hold them like gold bars because they do not want to give them away. This is on the Toronto Maple Leafs and the past regime for not focusing on that. They are, again, a high offensive team, and they don't have they chose this. They chose to go get Bertuzzi. They chose to get Domi. They could have allocated that money and free agency for defensemen. They could have gone out for a Dmitry Orlov or whatever. And now you hear they're in the market for a guy like Nikita Zadorov. But watch, that's going to cost you a heavy price too, because he's a top 4 defenseman who can log some minutes. That's not going to come cheap, Albert. So when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and the situation, not only does if you ever thought about trading Nylander, it would damage the psyche completely in this locker room, right? It's not like last year when Dubas went and got all these pieces and to put all his chips in the middle. This would be kind of the opposite. You're getting rid of a big ticket player for depth pieces per se. You're not bringing in another superstar defenseman back. So that's why I think this would never happen. And
well, you're putting too much stock into what these players think. If I'm Brad Treliving, I can care less what Austin Matthews thinks about me trading one of Marner and Nylander. I can care less about what they think about me trading a big ticket. You want to win a Stanley Cup? You want to know how it's done? Look at all these other teams and how they do it. And Brad Treliving is not – listen, Brad Treliving He's at fault for some of these deals that he's made right now. It's not working out. Klingberg is not working out for $4 million. Ryan Reeves is not working out. That contract extension that he gave to David Kampf, whether that was his decision or not, that's not really working out. Tyler Bertuzzi, man, Bax Domi's starting to turn it around a little bit. But if you're saying, oh, you can't make these moves, then you're telling me, okay, well, just throw away the season because it doesn't matter. Because they can't win they cannot win with the way they have their team structured. Someone has to go. And we've been saying this for a long time. This team, it's super talented, but cannot get it done in the playoffs. Matthews can't do it by himself, but he also needs some assistance in secondary scoring. Marner and Nylander, one of those guys has to go. Unless you're tree living and this is a season where you come in and you're assessing the team, to me, if that's the case, that's an absolute joke because you're just throwing away the season because it's going to be another first or second round exit. They cannot go into the playoffs with William Lagesson, Benoit, Lajoie, any of these guys as part of their defensive core and try and win a Stanley Cup. It is just not going to happen. And you have to hope that Samsonov can turn it around. And you have to hope that a rookie goaltender is good enough to make up for these defensive mistakes, which I don't think they can. So a move needs to be made.
A move needs to be made, but it's not going to be William Nylander. If you wanted to trade William Nylander, it should have been in the summertime. It should have been.
I understand that, but you know what? But Justin, this is why he brought in a guy like Klingberg. This is why he brought in these other secondary pieces, so he wouldn't have to do that. But now that's not working out. One injury to that defense. Jake McCabe going down broke. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. Liljegren goes down, and it's even worse. How do you go into a season as a cup contender when you're one injury away from your whole defense crumbling?
Again, I understand everything you're saying, but I'm saying now the situation they're in, they did this. They made this mess. They have to live with it now because what are you going to do? Right? You can trade it. You can trade.
What are you going to do, Justin?
Okay, let me ask you this. Are you going to now? You can't trade William Nylander now. Either A, he walks as a free agent, or you re-sign him to a big ticket deal. That's not going to happen. A trade for Nylander is not going to happen. You're not going to trade Morgan Rielly because his contract just kicked in. We talked about Tavares. No, even though he's playing well, nobody's going to touch that contract. Matthews is off limits. So the last person is Marner. And are you going to trade Mitch Marner? Is Brad Tree living the guy? Does he have the cojones to trade Mitch Marner out of Toronto? A Toronto-born guy who's putting up a near 100-point season last year, an all-star, all of that, yada, yada. Are you going to have the you-know-what to trade him? Because he could have done that this past summer with William Nylander. He could have traded him, right? The same situation is going to come up with Mitch Marner this offseason. He's proved last summer, he didn't have what it takes to trade Nylander. He didn't even I don't even know if it took calls or at all. Is he going to do that with Marner? I don't think so. I don't think you can, in this market, in this landscape in Toronto, can you be known as the GM who trades Mitch Marner? I don't think so. From where I see it is, and again, as much as you think the optics don't matter, the optics do matter, Albert. Where does he want to be known as the guy who trades Mitch Marner, and then Mitch Marner goes somewhere else and continues to have great success, and he brings in a defenseman that might not live? Look what happened in Edmonton. They traded Taylor Hall. He goes on and wins the Hart Trophy, and they get Adam Larson. Now, in the long term, it didn't work out for both teams, but in the short term, was Peter Chiarelli not getting absolutely eviscerated in Edmonton for trading a Hart Trophy winner?
You get paid the big type of dollars to take that type of make these decisions. I have no sympathy for a GM who doesn't want to be known as the guy who traded a big ticket item in Toronto. If that's his thinking, if that's a GM's thinking, you're not fit for the job.
Will ownership allow him to trade Mitch Marner? Will ownership step in and say, no, you're not going to trade Mitch Marner?
Yeah, well, that's fair too.
Exactly. So
that's
again,
let me ask you this though. Let me ask you. Let's end on this. If you were to trade one, you're Brad Tree living today, would it be Mitch Marner and William Nylander?
It's Marner for sure, because if I can trade Marner this offseason, I know he's got another year on his deal, so teams are going to be more likely to trade for him rather than a guy who's a pending UFA, right? And I think, honestly, you could get a whole lot for Mitch Marner. You could get a top 4 defenseman. You could get draft capital that you could use to get another defenseman. You could get, and then here's the other thing. You're not going to be spending $12 million plus. Because I think if you look at it, Matthews at 13.25. Marner is going to be at least at 12.5, I think, right? Nylander's probably going to be around 11.25, right? So you do that. That's like, what, almost 40 million just on those 3 alone, pretty much, right? So I think when you look at this situation, right, it's This is what the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be. I think that this core four or this big three of Nylander, Marner, and Matthews, you're tied to them until you decide you want to trade them. And I don't think any of them are going to decide to trade them. And quite frankly, I think that's what's going to be the detriment of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it all started with that John Tavares deal.
Yeah. Yeah. True Living is dealing with the Leafs pass in Kyle Dubas, who's having a hell of a time in Pittsburgh right now. But it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season pans out and what moves True Living makes. I highly doubt, I know we brought up this topic and had this conversation. I highly doubt any of those players will be traded. But I think if you really want to become a true cup contender and you want to balance out your team, I think one of those guys has to go. We've been talking about this forever. And you know what, Justin? We're probably going to be talking about this in the coming weeks as well.